The void of space was silent, but the tension surrounding Earth was deafening. A fleet of massive, dark ships emerged from the darkness, their angular designs reflecting the faint light of distant stars. These were the ships of the Chris Dominion, a race feared across the galaxy for their relentless conquests. To them, Earth was nothing more than another primitive world to crush underfoot. From the bridge of the largest Chris warship, Commander Xylar observed the blue planet on his screen. He smirked, his scaled fingers tapping rhythmically on the armrest of his command chair. "So this is Earth," he said, his voice laced with disdain. "Hardly worth the effort. But the Council insists. Let's see how these humans beg for mercy." Back on Earth, the United Earth Defense Council was in a state of controlled chaos. A giant holographic map of the solar system dominated the war room. Red blips representing Chris ships filled the area around Earth. The sight was enough to send a chill through even the most seasoned officers. Commander Elena Varga stood at the center of the room, her sharp eyes scanning the map. Unlike the others, she showed no sign of panic. Her voice was steady as she addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, we warned them. They didn't listen. Now, it's time to show them what humanity is capable of." The Chris had ignored Earth's warning, broadcasted hours earlier. "Leave now or face destruction." To the Chris, it was laughable. No species had ever stood against them and survived. They had conquered worlds far more advanced than this one. Humanity's warning was seen as little more than the bravado of a doomed race. Xylar ordered his communications officer to send a reply. Within minutes, a message echoed across Earth's airwaves. "This is Commander Xylar of the Chris Dominion. Your threats are amusing, but pointless. Surrender now, and we may spare a fraction of your population. Resist, and you will face annihilation." The message was met with silence from Earth. Xylar grinned. "Cowards," he muttered. But Elena was anything but silent. She was already giving orders. "Activate orbital defenses. Prepare all ground forces, and keep our trump card hidden until the right moment." Earth's defenses, though outmatched in sheer numbers and firepower, had one key advantage: adaptability. Over the years, humanity had learned to innovate, often turning weaknesses into strengths. Elena was counting on that. Meanwhile, on the Chris flagship, Xylar grew impatient. "Begin the first wave," he commanded. "Let's see how long they can last." Small, sleek Chris ships broke away from the main fleet, darting toward Earth's orbit. They targeted satellites and space stations, destroying them with precision laser fire. Explosions lit up the darkness of space, and the Chris pilots reported their progress with pride. On the ground, Elena watched the attacks unfold on her screens. She clenched her fists but didn't panic. "They're testing us," she said quietly. Turning to her team, she added, "Let's give them something to think about. Activate the decoy drones." Moments later, dozens of unmanned drones launched from hidden bases on Earth's surface. Equipped with stealth technology, they swarmed the Chris ships, targeting weak points in their hulls. For the first time, the Chris faced resistance they hadn't anticipated. On the flagship, Xylar frowned. "What is this? Primitive drones." He scoffed, but then his frown deepened as reports of damage flooded in. "Impossible. How are they hitting our ships?" Elena allowed herself a small smile as she watched the Chris hesitate. "They're starting to realize we're not so easy to crush," she said. But she knew this was only the beginning. The Chris fleet was vast, and their commanders were ruthless. Humanity's survival depended on more than just clever tactics. It would take courage, sacrifice, and determination to win this fight. As the Chris regrouped, preparing for a larger assault, Elena stood firm. Her voice rang through the command center. "They think we're weak. They think we'll break. Let's prove them wrong." The battle for Earth had begun. The Chris fleet hovered just outside Earth's atmosphere, their weapons trained on the planet's defenses. Commander Xylar was confident. He believed the first wave had shattered any hope humanity had left. Earth's orbital defenses were weak, outdated even, and their retaliatory drones were nothing more than an annoyance. He had expected no real challenge. As Sylar prepared to launch his second, more brutal attack, his communications officer interrupted. "Commander, we're receiving unusual readings from Earth's moon." Sylar's sharp eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. The officer quickly scanned the data. Unidentified energy signatures. They're not supposed to be there. Sylar didn't have time to waste on vague readings. "Ignore it," he ordered. "Focus on Earth's surface. Prepare the next wave." But back on Earth, Commander Elena Varga was well aware of the Chris commander's mistake. She'd known all along that humanity had to rely on more than just space drones and orbital weapons. Humanity's real strength was their ingenuity, and more importantly, their ability to hide their most dangerous secrets in plain sight. As the Chris fleet advanced, Earth's forces launched another wave of resistance, led by a fleet of fighter jets that flew in precise, coordinated formations. The Chris were quick to retaliate, their massive ships releasing torrents of laser fire, destroying the jets almost instantly. But this wasn't the real fight. "Hold position," Elena commanded, watching the screens carefully. On Earth's moon, hidden beneath layers of rock and craters, the real weapon was preparing. Over the years, Earth's most brilliant minds had worked in secret to develop a new weapon that would change the balance of power. The Chris had no idea what was coming. As the first wave of Chris fighters closed in on Earth's atmosphere, a massive surge of energy shot up from the moon. A beam of intense, concentrated light pierced the void, striking one of the smaller Chris ships in its vulnerable underbelly. The ship exploded in a blinding flash. Sylar's eyes widened in shock. What was that? He stared at the chaotic reports flooding in from his fleet. Another Chris warship was hit by the same beam. "Impossible," Sylar muttered. "They don't have the technology for this." But the beam wasn't the only surprise Earth had prepared. Elena, from her command center, issued a single word: activate. Across Earth, dozens of hidden satellites, cloaked and disguised as simple debris, activated in sync. They released a series of EMP pulses, cutting off communication lines between Chris ships. The Chris fleet, once operating in perfect harmony, suddenly found themselves disconnected and disoriented. "What the?" Sylar barked, looking at the cascading chaos on his screen. But humanity wasn't done. Elena's final move was set into motion. On the surface, small, unmanned drone ships were released from military bases hidden deep underground. These drones were equipped with cutting-edge stealth technology designed to infiltrate even the most secure fleets. They rapidly approached the now chaotic Chris ships, aiming for their exposed hulls. As the drones struck with pinpoint precision, large portions of the Chris fleet began to crumble. Suddenly, the Chris were not the dominant force in space. They were vulnerable. Elena watched the damage unfold, her face steely with determination. "They thought we were weak," she whispered to herself. "They thought we didn't have a chance." But the battle wasn't over. The Chris had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. But Sylar wasn't the kind of commander to back down so easily. He had his own tricks up his sleeve. As his ships began to regroup, he ordered his fleet to switch tactics. "Focus on Earth's surface," Sylar barked. "We'll scorch their cities. Leave nothing behind." He believed that Earth's resilience would break if they lost their homes, their cities. But Elena was already thinking ahead. She knew that the true power of humanity wasn't in their cities or weapons. It was in their spirit, their drive, and their refusal to be crushed. "Hold the line," Elena ordered again, her voice unwavering. "They've made the mistake of underestimating us. Let's show them why that will be their downfall." Across the globe, soldiers, civilians, and scientists all rallied. People who had never held a weapon before joined in the fight, ready to defend their home. Their ingenuity, their determination, and their unity would prove that no force in the galaxy could ever defeat humanity. The Chris had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated the human spirit. And now, They would face the full force of that mistake. The battle above Earth raged on, and the Chris fleet, though shaken by the unexpected attack, was not about to give up. Their ships, now fully regrouped, began to focus all their firepower on Earth's major cities. Xylar had underestimated humanity's ability to fight back, but he wasn't about to make that mistake again. He had his own weapons, his own plans, and he was about to unleash them. "Prepare the planetary annihilation weapon," Xylar commanded, his voice cold and steady. "I want Earth to feel the full weight of Chris power." On the command deck of the Chris flagship, officers scrambled to activate the massive weapon hidden deep within the heart of their fleet. It was a doomsday device, capable of destroying entire planets with a single devastating strike. Earth's final warning had been issued, and Xylar was ready to finish it. Back on Earth, Commander Elena Varga watched the movement of the Chris ships, her fingers tight on the controls. "They're preparing something," she murmured, her mind racing. The destruction of Earth's cities had already begun. Entire skyscrapers were crumbling to dust as Chris ships unleashed powerful laser beams, reducing the most advanced human architecture to nothing. But Elena refused to let despair take hold. She had seen the devastation, but she had also seen humanity's strength in action. Across the world, civilians and soldiers were holding strong, fighting with everything they had. It was humanity's spirit, not its technology, that would win this fight. "Activate the countermeasure," Elena ordered, her voice firm. "We have one shot at this." A small group of scientists and engineers, working in secret for years, had been preparing a weapon capable of turning the tide of the battle. It wasn't a superweapon like the Chris annihilation device, but it was something far more subtle, a powerful EMP pulse, strong enough to disable the Chris fleet's most vital systems. The only problem was getting it close enough to hit the heart of the Chris armada. The humans had one last chance to stop the Chris. High above Earth, a small squadron of stealth fighters flew into position. These were no ordinary fighters. They had been designed specifically to infiltrate enemy lines and release the EMP pulse that could potentially turn the battle in humanity's favor. Their engines hummed softly, blending with the silence of space. As the Chris continued their assault, unaware of the incoming strike, the stealth fighters entered the fleet's perimeter. They had only one mission: get close enough to launch the EMP pulse without being detected. If they failed, the planet would fall. Inside the stealth fighters, the pilots' hearts raced, but they remained focused. They were humanity's last hope. The Chris ships were massive, their firepower overwhelming. But the pilots trusted their training, their technology, and most of all, their will to survive. The fate of Earth rested on their shoulders. "Steady," Elena whispered to herself, watching the fighters approach from her command center. Every second felt like an eternity. Then, without warning, the Chris detected them. A warning siren blared as the stealth fighters' cloaking system failed under the intense firepower of the Chris fleet. "Deploy the pulse now," the lead pilot shouted, knowing it was their only chance. In a flash, the EMP pulse was released, a brilliant wave of energy spreading across space, hitting the Chris fleet. For a moment, everything went silent. Then, chaos erupted. The Chris fleet began to falter. Their weapons systems short-circuited. Shields went down. The massive ships that had once been invincible now floated helplessly in space, their systems in disarray. The Chris had been crippled, their most advanced technology rendered useless by a single well-placed strike. Xylar stood frozen on the bridge of his flagship, his jaw clenched in disbelief. "What is this?" he roared. "Who dares?" His words were cut off as his ship's systems failed. He could feel the tremors in the hull as the control panel sparked with electrical failure. Xylar's eyes widened with fury, realizing that the tide of the battle had shifted in a way he had never expected. But it wasn't over. Humanity's victory was not guaranteed yet. The Chris still had their ground forces, and they were prepared to fight to the last. The planet's cities were in ruins, and much of Earth's defenses were damaged. "Now we finish them off," Elena said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Prepare the ground forces for a counteroffensive." Across Earth, soldiers and civilians rallied. They knew that the enemy was vulnerable, but they also knew that this was their final opportunity. The Chris had taken everything from them. Now it was time to take it all back. As Sylar struggled to regain control of his fleet, Elena's forces prepared for the next wave. The battle was far from over, but the Chris had learned a painful lesson. Never underestimate the power of humanity's will to survive. And in that moment, Earth's fight for freedom took on a new intensity. The Chris were no longer the unstoppable force they once were. They were now fighting for their very survival. The Chris fleet was in disarray, their mighty ships drifting helplessly in the cold void of space. Sylar's fury could be felt across the entire armada. His once commanding presence was now overshadowed by the reality of a crippling defeat. The EMP pulse had hit their core systems, rendering their advanced weaponry and shields useless. It was a disaster. The tables had turned, and the Chris were no longer the dominant force they believed themselves to be. Sylar stood at the command console, his face twisted in anger. "Re-establish communications," he shouted. His voice echoed across the bridge, but there was no response. Every attempt to regain control of his fleet had failed. Their ships were no longer responding to his orders. His command was slipping away. On Earth, Commander Elena Varga could hardly believe it. The Chris fleet, once an unstoppable juggernaut, had been reduced to chaos. But the battle was not over. Earth had struck a powerful blow, but the enemy was not finished yet. Elena knew that this was their moment to press the advantage. If they didn't act quickly, the Chris could regroup, rearm, and launch another devastating assault. The world's cities were still in ruins, the ground forces still facing overwhelming odds. The battle was far from won, but humanity had proven one thing: they would not be intimidated. "Prepare the ground forces," Elena ordered. "We can't give them time to recover. We strike now." Across the globe, soldiers rallied to Elena's command. Civilians, once caught in the chaos, now stood ready to fight for their planet. The fight had become more than a battle for survival. It had become a fight for their future. The Chris ground forces, though not as numerous as their fleet, were well-equipped and ruthless. They had already begun to land in key locations across Earth's surface, aiming to crush any remaining resistance. But Earth's forces were not going to sit idly by. They had learned from the first wave of attacks, and they were ready to strike back with everything they had. On the battlefield, Earth's soldiers moved with precision. They were equipped with the latest technology: laser rifles, advanced armor, and drones capable of providing real-time intelligence. The Chris soldiers, though powerful and brutal, were no match for humanity's combined ingenuity and spirit. As the battle raged across Earth's cities, Elena's forces pushed back against the invaders. Every soldier, every civilian, fought with a sense of purpose, driven by the knowledge that their home, their way of life, was at stake. They fought not just for survival, but for the future of their children, for the future of the planet they had built. Back in space, Sylar's frustration grew. His fleet was still in disarray, but he was determined to regroup. He issued orders to his fleet, attempting to regain control. "Rebuild our defenses," he barked. "Prepare for another assault." But there was a problem. The Chris were not used to this kind of resistance. They were a species accustomed to overwhelming force and swift conquest. The human ability to adapt, to think outside the box, had caught them off guard. In the midst of the chaos, Earth's remaining space fighters launched one last coordinated assault. These fighters, despite being outnumbered, were faster and more agile than their Chris counterparts. They darted in and out of the remaining Chris ships, striking weak points and exploiting the damage caused by the EMP pulse. It was a guerrilla-style attack, small in scale but devastating in its effectiveness. Each fighter that went down was replaced by another, and the Chris found themselves struggling to maintain control of their fleet. Every time they thought they had regained the upper hand, Earth's fighters would strike again. Xylar paced back and forth on his bridge, his mind racing. The Chris had never encountered a species like humanity before. Their ability to adapt, to fight with such resolve, was unlike anything he had ever seen. The tables had turned so quickly, and now the Chris were fighting for their survival. "Send the command," Xylar ordered, his voice cold and calculating. "Prepare the last weapon." It was the Chris' final attempt to regain control, a devastating energy cannon that would burn a path through Earth's surface, annihilating everything in its way. Xylar knew that this was their last chance to win. But as he looked out at the battle unfolding, a sinking feeling grew in his chest. Could this final weapon really undo the damage humanity had already done? On Earth, Alina knew that the Chris would not give up easily. They would use their last weapon to strike at the heart of humanity's defenses. The moment was critical. She had one shot left to stop them. "Prepare the final strike," Alina said, her voice steely with resolve. "This ends now." With that, humanity's last move was set into motion. It was now or never. The final moments of the battle for Earth had begun. The Chris fleet was wounded, but they were far from defeated. Xylar had activated their ultimate weapon, a colossal energy cannon that could turn Earth's cities into nothing but ashes. The weapon was aimed, charged, and ready to fire. If it unleashed its full power, the planet would be destroyed. The Chris had made their final move, but this was humanity's last chance to stop them. On Earth, Commander Elena Varga watched the approaching storm from her command center. The countdown for the Chris weapon had begun. The atmosphere in the room was thick with tension. Soldiers and civilians, once scattered and broken, were now united with one singular purpose: to protect their world. The fight had brought them together in a way nothing else could. "We have one shot at this," Alina said, her voice low but full of determination. "Every soldier, every fighter, every citizen. This is our time. We can't let them win." Across the world, people responded. Soldiers took their positions, civilians prepared their defenses, and every eye turned to the sky. The Chris may have underestimated humanity once, but they were about to learn how strong the human spirit truly was. Above, the Chris fleet's energy cannon glowed with a terrible bright light. The weapon was ready to fire, and Xylar's eyes burned with anticipation. He believed that with this weapon, the humans would finally understand the true power of the Chris. They would learn that resistance was futile. But he underestimated one thing: humanity's will to fight. "Launch the final strike," Elena commanded, her heart pounding in her chest. "We take them down now." The final plan had been set in motion. A small, highly trained team of pilots had been chosen to perform a daring last-ditch mission. They would launch directly into the heart of the Chris fleet, risking everything to destroy the weapon before it could be used. It was a suicide mission, but they were willing to make that sacrifice. The squadron of elite fighters raced toward the Chris flagship, their engines roaring through space. They weaved between the disabled Chris ships, dodging blasts of energy that had once been powerful but were now desperate, inaccurate strikes. Every pilot knew that they had only one shot at success. "This is it," said the leader of the squadron, a young pilot named Leo. "We have to take that cannon down, or Earth is finished." The fighter jets split into smaller groups, each targeting a different part of the Chris flagship. Their weapons fired in synchronized precision, creating a storm of attacks aimed at disabling the cannon's power source. But the Chris were not finished yet. They fought back with everything they had, trying to repel the assault. As the battle raged, Elena remained focused. Her eyes never left the screens, watching the progress of her pilots. She knew that every second counted, that the fate of the world rested in their hands. The Chris might have underestimated Earth before, but they were about to realize that humanity's ingenuity and bravery were more than a match for even their most powerful weapon. Suddenly, Leo's voice crackled over the comms. "We're in position, engaging the cannon now." The tension was unbearable as the pilots raced toward their target, weaving through the wreckage of Chris ships, closing in on the energy cannon that threatened to destroy Earth. The weapon hummed with power, its core glowing brightly as it charged. "We can do this," Alina whispered under her breath, her hands tight on the controls. Then, a sudden explosion rocked the bridge of the Chris flagship. One of the fighters had successfully destroyed a critical component of the cannon's power system. The weapon faltered, its light dimming as the energy flow was disrupted. "Direct hit," the pilot shouted. "The cannon's power is down." For a moment, silence fell over the battlefield. The Chris fleet seemed to pause, unsure of what had just happened. Xylar's eyes widened in disbelief as the weapon he had pinned his hopes on began to collapse. "No, this can't be happening," Xylar shouted, his voice filled with disbelief. The momentum had shifted once again. The Chris had lost their final weapon, and their fleet was now vulnerable. Earth's pilots pressed on, using this opportunity to finish the job. The remaining Chris ships were no longer a threat. Their weapons were failing, their ships were slowing down, and their will to fight was beginning to crumble. The human forces, both on the ground and in space, launched their final assault. It was no longer a desperate struggle for survival. It was a victory march. Every soldier, every fighter, gave their all, knowing that the end was near. And soon, it was clear, Earth was going to win. As Earth's soldiers closed in on victory, Alina breathed a sigh of relief. The battle had been long, hard, and filled with sacrifice. But humanity had proven something. When pushed to the brink, they would never give up. They would fight to the very end. And in that moment, as the last Chris ships fell, Earth's victory was assured. The planet had survived, and humanity had shown that even the greatest of invaders could not break their spirit.